My name is Erika Almirón, and I am running for City Council at large here in Philadelphia on May 21st. I am excited to be building a campaign and a movement around what our city needs and what our people need. What I'm actually talking about is that we actually all have to just work together to build a city that's about all of us, right? Because I think we haven't done that.
What I notice is that white progressives sort of don't really know her outside of her juntos work until they're in front of her, and by the end of it they're like, oh my god, I want to hug you, and what can I do and how can I help?
We can't turn the city into what we want it to be without everybody in it.
I really appreciate that your campaign is about people in Philly. You know, we all live here, we're all trying to work towards having a better city for everyone.
Yeah.
And you actually really know your stuff, and you're not just...
My commitment is to not take corporate PAC money, dark money, real estate developer money. And the reason I do that is because I want every person who votes for me to understand and know that when they vote for me, I will be listening to the people, not money, and not moneyed interests.
There was talk about a public bank so that Philadelphia would have more say over, I guess, the distribution of lending.
So to me, the public bank is a way of saying, this is our money, this is how we're gonna deal with it, right? And it takes it out of that big Wall Street, just kind of grab of our tax money. And to consider, what does it mean to be able to do that kind of lending that's a little more equitable in the city like Philadelphia. The reason rent control is so important to me is because there are over 50% of the city is renters, right? And so I saw, right there on 10th and Snyder, a woman had talked to me and I was trying to help her because her rent went from $900 a month to $1,400 a month in 1 year.
Jesus. When she went to renew her lease or something?
And she had a business.
Isn't that an illegal increase? I thought there was a cap on the percentage of increase versus a single.
No.
That would be rent stability.
Yeah.
So that's the thing we're advocating for.
That's what we're saying, is that we need to figure out a way where people aren't pushed out in that way. And part of it too is that a lot of the members of the community that I've worked with at Juntos won't have access to a mortgage, And whether that be they don't make enough money but are working 3 jobs, or whether that be that they're undocumented. I think it's very important that we focus on housing. I am running on a platform that is around ending the 10-year tax abatement, talking about rent control, talking about affordable and accessible housing. Rent control has to happen down here. We have to think about the tax abatement. It's a wash. You'll have nice Mexican restaurants not owned by any of our folks though. And how do communities talk about the land in a way that's useful to them, and so that we aren't actually having a situation where developers are dictating who gets access to land in our city. So we have to figure out a way where renting is stable. Otherwise people are just going to be pushed all over the city. And I think that also that even going into the bank, some of the banks wouldn't let them come in with their passports as an ID, right? Just even that became
Even though it's a valid ID.
Even though it's a valid ID and you should be able to open up an account with a passport, some of them were turned away from some of those banks.
Isn't that against the fair lending? Not fair lending, fair
banking.
Yeah.
Fair banking.
So then how are we holding some of these banks accountable in that way? And also that these banks are making tons of money off of just deportations, they're all investing into incarceration and detention. But it's not gentrifying as fast out there because it just, public transit won't allow it to. There's no public transit really going out that way, as you know.
And in West, the gentrification is going to hit a wall pretty soon. It's incrementally working its way towards 52nd Street, but 52nd Street is a line in the sand for Black communities in West Philly. They are not interested in allowing past 52nd Street. Gentrification only really succeeds in Black neighborhoods when the neighborhood isn't prepared for it or organizing against
People have
it.
been talking about it for a long time.
And
yeah.
West Philly is ready. They're not going to allow this gentrification to push past 52nd Street, and their goal is to build up the 52nd Street corridor of predominantly Black-owned businesses. That's what Hanif is doing. The thing about West Philly is the houses are coveted. They're beautiful, big, old Dutch Victorians, and they're 8 bedrooms, and they're gorgeous. And if you buy them before the neighborhood gentrifies, the house becomes $1 million house very quickly. And so they're Black community development organizations, Black business interest groups are buying up all these houses and buying up the houses north of 52nd Street so that predominantly white groups can't buy them, which I think is brilliant. Capitalism, make it work for you.
Right? The idea is that like capitalism comes from like work labor, right, and actual labor. But when you have like inherited wealth and you have like,
Right.
you know, it's like the idea that like somebody would tell my parents that because they're Latino, they're lazy, but they don't have a job and inherited a ton of money is like the oxymoron of capitalism, right? So my parents have cleaned houses most of their lives and continue to as a way to make ends meet, like a lot of the immigrant families that are here, right? But then out of the mouth of somebody that like, they would never, they clean big houses out in the main line. And maybe those people would never say to my parents directly, like, we think your people are lazy, but probably in private circles they do, right? These immigrants are a bunch of lazy people just coming to steal jobs. And it's like, you don't have a job, you just have inherited wealth, you know what I mean? And that is kind of the problem, I think, with capitalism. How do we take out that structure? I'm excited to be fighting for some of the issues that have mattered to me the most over the years. Everything from criminal justice reforms and ending the ways that we're incarcerating people overly in this city, and fighting on education issues so that we make sure that we're fully funding our schools. I think we need to think about accountability for these charter schools in the moratorium. So like, what is going on with charter schools? I would say there's a equity issue around the schools, even across the whole city. So what does it mean to actually thinking about teachers that look like our students, ESL teachers, real supports, right? We have a situation where there's school police and there's metal detectors, and more we have schools looking like prisons, rather than taking some of that money and investing it into the supports that they need. We don't have nurses in some of the schools. We don't have librarians in some of the schools. 3 years ago, a 6-year-old girl had died of an asthma attack in a school that didn't have a nurse. And had the nurse been there, she would have lived. They're supposed to have nurses, but then they claim that they don't have enough money. And so then the first thing that they take of the social service supports, ESL teachers, counselors, yeah.
College access counselors were
We
the
have-
first thing to go.
Yeah, both of my sisters are educators. They both work inside of a charter school, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not unionized, those schools aren't unionized, but one works at a really good charter school. She's an ESL teacher, but when she had like large classroom sizes, like there's just not enough supports for them. My other sister does college access. So I would say like more supports, less criminalizing of young people, ending the expansion of charter schools across the city, and thinking about how to support teachers that are coming in. Especially, I think that there's just like a lack of teachers of color in some of our schools. ESL students are the least represented in some of the charter schools, right? And then what happens is that they actually need more funding, but then they get pushed back to a neighborhood school like a South Philly High or something like that, and then those schools get less money. The history book that the kid had in that charter school still had the Berlin Wall up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When did the Berlin Wall come down? Like 89? You know what I'm saying? What are we supposed to be doing when that's basically who gets the money, and then they don't care about those kids? Like some of those schools just get like, they're just siphoning resources away and then opening these schools, and there's no accountability to them. When you have an all city public school system, then the school district of Philadelphia is your target. If something goes wrong, you know who to go to. But now it's like each individual school has to be accounted for and held accountable. So the school district has a very small office of accountability for the charters, but it's just like there's too many. They can't actually do it. And to actually take away a charter requires like the school board to vote on it. It just requires a lot of moving parts. And so parents wind up just sending their kids. And there is a lottery system. Most of them are lottery system based.
Catchments.
And catchments. But the catchment system works that like you have a certain amount of time if they're in your neighborhood. And if you as a parent, for example, come in the middle of the year, those slots are full. So your neighborhood school, you can't even send your kid to.
So what do they do in the interim?
They have to find another school nearby. And I've seen like there's a revolving door. So if you have a kid who's gotten special needs, if you have a kid who's constantly like in trouble or whatever, those kids are usually ushered out. Like there are charter schools here in South Philly that have literally like said, we would love to take your kid, but we don't have an ESL program in here. Rather than mandating that every school have an ESL program, right? Then they're just shuffling the kids everywhere. So they don't have to invest in an ESL program, right? So they're just competing all against each other rather than thinking about a system that works for our kids. And that we're thinking about how to educate every child in this city, regardless of race, class, or immigration status. But when I was organizing young people, I was at all these different schools. University City had asbestos. Instead of actually clearing it, like they like just destroyed it, you know? Germantown High School is still an abandoned high school. When they did all these closings, like, what was that, like 4 or 5 years ago, they like closed over 20 schools in the city, and some of those buildings are still abandoned. So Germantown High School is completely abandoned still. And I think Germantown High School now is sold to a developer for $100,000.
That's it?
Yes. And they're trying to turn it into like, and the whole community is organizing around it because they're trying to turn it into a Rite Aid. And they're like, what? Like, we don't even have an accessible supermarket. Like, what are you talking about? Like, why can't we turn it into a space that's actually useful for the community?
Everyone has to eat.
Right.
Yeah,
There's no reason.
capitalism would
There's no
dictate.
reason to even say, okay, so these poor people, maybe they're gonna buy less kale
Right,
and
but
more
they're still gonna
iceberg
buy
lettuce, but they're still
groceries.
gonna buy. Like, I don't
Right.
understand why someone would try to make the case that someone just they don't need groceries.
Right.
Well, that's how we saw it incrementally happen in West. Is like first there was no food, and then Aldi came and everybody lost their minds and was like, "Oh God, it's arrived, civilization!" And I was like, "We've been starving and going to Upper Darby for like
Yeah.
a decade."
Go to the H Mart.
The 69th Street, that's my love.
And I'm excited. I'm excited to be working with everybody and to learn more from everybody and to win for the people.